Hi, my name is Jennifer, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to recommend to you some crime fiction books in translation. I have 8 books that I want to talk about, and these are all, for me, 5-star books, the best of the best. We have 2 from France, 2 from Japan, 2 from Denmark, 1 from Iceland and 1 from the Netherlands. When I talk about these books, I am not going to go into spoilers. I will just talk about information that you would see on the blurb or on a website if you were looking to purchase the book, so no spoilers. Okay, we'll start with France, and the first book that I want to talk about is Blackwater Lilies by Michel Bussi. This was translated from the French by Sean Whiteside. This is the first book that I read by this author. I have since read several other books by him, but this is still by far my favourite. So this is quite an unusual crime novel. The basic plot is we have a man called Jerome who is found dead in a stream. It's set in Giverny in France, which is where Monet is from, hence the title, hence the lilies in the title. We follow the police as they try to solve the crime of how Jerome came to die. What's interesting about this book is we see from the perspective of 3 different women, 3 different female characters, and their relationships with the dead man. And when I say relationships, I don't mean like relationships, just relationships in terms of their interactions with him, how they knew him and so on. On the front cover of the book, there is a quote from the Sunday Times which says, "The novel ends with one of the most reverberating shocks in modern crime fiction." And whilst I don't disagree with that, I think that almost does the book a disservice in a way. Like I am one for like a big twist. I love a big twist. If you tell me a book's got a great twist, I will read it. But this book is not just about the ending for me. It's quite a quiet book. It's quite unusual in how it's told. I think it's really well written. It's a great story. It's got great characters. So if you want a book which is about the twist, I mean, this has a good twist. It says it on the cover, but it's much more than that, so don't let that put you off. The second French book that I want to talk about is Alex by Pierre Lemaitre. This was translated into English by Frank Wynne. This, again, was the first book that I read by this author. Alex is actually the second in the series, but this was the first one to be translated into English. You can read the series out of order, and I did so. Alex is the protagonist of the book, and we know from the start that she's been kidnapped and she is being held in a disused warehouse in a wooden cage hanging from the ceiling. And the police are trying to find where she is. They're trying to locate her. It's a race against time if they'll be able to get to her before something even more terrible happens. For me, this has one of the most memorable opening sequences of any book I've ever read. This is quite a plotty book, in a good way. There's lots of twists and turns. It's really well written. I've gone on to read, I know I've definitely read 1 more in the series, possibly another one, I'm not sure. There's 4 in the series, and they translated them like out of order, which I don't really know why they do that. So they translated the second one, then the first, then the fourth, and then the third. So I think I'm probably going to reread this series this year, but I'll read it in the order that they were published in France. But you absolutely can read them out of order. I think Alex was probably translated first because I think it is the best. So that's a really good one. The next book I want to talk about is Dear Mr. M by Herman Koch. This was translated from the Dutch by Sam Garrett. Herman Koch is probably most well known for the novel The Dinner, which I'll insert a picture of. It's one with the lobster on the cover. But for me, Dear Mr. M, I think is his best book, certainly the ones that I've read so far. Mr. M is a well-known author, although his success is starting to dwindle, and we follow our narrator who is themselves following the life of Mr. M very closely. We find out that one of Mr. M's books seems to resemble very closely the life of our narrator. This is quite a strange but quite an unusual crime novel. It kind of messes with your head quite a lot, but in a way that I really, really enjoyed. Next up is Resin by Riel. This was translated from the Danish by Charlotte Barslund. So our main character is a little girl called Liv who dies when she's 6 years old. However, she doesn't really die. The town where she lives, they believe she's died, but actually her parents have hidden her in her father's workshop in order to keep her safe. So we follow Liv's character very closely. We see how she understands the situation that she's in. In parts, it's an emotional book. It's dark and it's disturbing. There is a certain image from this book, from towards the end of the book, which has really stayed with me. It's a book I would highly recommend, and I believe that the book has won several Scandinavian Crime Awards. Next, we're going to head over to Iceland with The Darkness by Ragnar Jonassen, which was translated from Icelandic by Victoria Cribb. So this is the first in the Hidden Iceland trilogy. We follow our main character, who is a detective inspector. Her name's Hulda Hermannsdottir. She's been forced into early retirement, and she's been told before she retires she has 2 weeks. She can choose a cold case to look into. So she chooses the case of a Russian woman whose body was found washed up on the shore, and she starts to investigate this cold case before she retires. What we get throughout the trilogy of books, and I do recommend the whole trilogy, I gave the first and the third book 5 stars each, and the second book I gave 4 stars. So we get a lot from our main character's life, backstory. So in a way, so you often get that, don't you, with sort of crime series. You do get the police officers' backstory and stuff, but it's more prominent in this trilogy. I think the police character is really what makes the trilogy. She's quite an unusual character to hear from because she is an older woman. And for me, this book does something quite unique, which I can't say too much about, but it's quite clever. It's quite a different kind of crime novel, which I would highly recommend. Now we're going to head back over to Denmark. I don't know why I didn't do these in order. This is The Chestnut Man by Soren Sveistrup. This was translated from the Danish by Caroline Waite. So The Chestnut Man is more like your standard police procedural compared to some of the others on this list. It's really dark and disturbing. So in this book, there is a serial killer on the loose who leaves next to the dead bodies these little dolls made of chestnuts, hence the title, The Chestnut Man. And apparently it's tradition for children to make these little chestnut dolls. It gives it a really sinister feel. I was gripped by the book. It was quite a page turner, really quite plotty and quite dark. I believe this has been made into a Netflix series, which I've not seen yet, but let me know if you've seen it, if it's any good. For our final 2 books, we're going to head over to Japan. So first up is Confessions by Kane Minato, which was translated from the Japanese by Stephen Snyder. This is a very strange little book and really quite disturbing. So our main character is a school teacher, and she has decided that she's going to take early retirement. Before she retires, we see her talking to her class, to her pupils, about why she has taken the decision to retire. We know this from early on, her young child has tragically died in an accident, and she believes that 2 of her pupils have killed her child. And we know this right from the start, you know this from the blurb. And it gets really dark. It has quite an interesting narrative voice. It's told in second person, I think, for the most part, and we get different letters and diary entries and different things throughout. And this one I think is is deliciously dark. And then the final book, again from Japan, is Malice by Keigo Higoshino. This was translated from Japanese by Alexander Os. So at the start of the novel, a best-selling novelist has been murdered at his home, in his locked office, in his locked house. And we follow the police officer who is trying to solve this crime. The two main suspects are the wife and the best friend of the dead man. This is not only a whodunit but also a howdunit and a whydunit. We get a couple of different narrative voices in the book. We get point of view from the police officer and also from another character, which switches throughout. And this is quite a sort of like a psychological mystery. As I say, it becomes a lot more about the why done it more than anything else, which I think is why I really liked it. I've read several books by Higoshino before. I think he's one of like the Japan's best-selling crime authors, and I really like everything I've read by him, but for me, Malice is my personal favourite of his. So those are all the books I wanted to talk about today. Let me know if you've read any of them and what you thought of them, and also let me know if you have any recommendations of any other crime fiction in translation that you think I might like. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll speak to you all again very soon. Bye!